Hello and welcome to this edition of SAC News in Focus. I'm Senda Garrido. Print journalism continues to be an essential part of informative and critical news reporting. With over 30 Pacemaker Awards, El Don continues to be a pinnacle on quality news reporting. Joining me now is former El Don news writer, journalist, and professor, Sarah Bennett. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So the El Don has been going on for a very long time, and you've been a professor here at SAC with El Don for quite a few years now. But I want to know, what was the first thought that comes to memory that you had, that you thought to yourself, you know what, I'm going to do something with journalism?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe that goes all the way back to writing in my diary when I was a kid and reading. I mean, I was always a reader. I started reading when I was like 3 years old. I just remember coming home from preschool and being like, I'm going to read this book. So I've always been a book nerd and a reading nerd and a writing nerd, and writing was always the way I expressed myself. My mother also was she was a professional secretary for the movie studios, a typist, and also a screenwriter. So I think it was kind of in my blood, like just to be a writer of some sort. For journalism, it was my 10th grade English teacher, and that's always where it starts. If you ask a lot of like journalism origin stories, if they worked at their high school newspaper, it was usually the English professor that was like the entry level drug kind of, because they are the ones that are reading your writing. They're reading your essays, they're reading all your stuff. So I had a really great professor, Ian Godburn. Went to 4 high schools, but I was at Calabasas High School for 1 year on a varsity soccer scholarship. So I ended up not being able to take his class in the fall and join the school newspaper, but I transferred to a different school, and I said, oh, well, maybe I'll join the paper here. So I still didn't think of it as a career. I was writing opinion pieces. I was ranting. I was an angsty, angry, emo punk teen, just wanting to write about the music scene that I was involved in and shouting out my opinions about pop culture in the world, my angsty opinions. But that's really where at least my writing started. I didn't really know it was journalism. I didn't know it could be a career. I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in music and start a record label and go on tours with bands, and that was my dream when I was in high school. So writing was really just something I felt like I did, but it wasn't until actually I came to Santa Ana College that I saw it as a potential career.
And once, I'm pretty sure, sounds like you were moving a lot during your early years. How did you end up at Santa Ana College?
Everything in my life is all chance. It's so interesting to think back on it, so thank you for asking these questions, because it's sometimes you just take opportunities when they come to you, right? If you don't have necessarily a great stable home to rely on, you're always looking outside of the home for whether it's friends or mentors or adults or relationships that are going to lead you in other directions that maybe your parents didn't provide that guidance for. So I was always really open to like the advice of my teachers or to my partners at the time or my friends or their parents and stuff. So right after high school, I graduated from North Hollywood High School up in LA, and at the time I was dating someone who lived in Orange County, and he just so happened to live a block away in the Washington neighborhood from Santa Ana College. Yep, right here.
Down the street.
I know.
Block.
And just when we were talking about saving some money, I had just lost another job. I took a year off after high school to get my stuff together. I needed to buy a car. I worked a bunch of part-time jobs. I mean, I really understand the struggle of our students because I was a student, and I had a lot of those same challenges. And so we just decided that I would move to Orange County and try to start a life, and we were going to split rent on an apartment in Orange, and I got a full-time job in Irvine at an office, like a 9-to-5 job, and was just trying to kind of get my stuff together. And he was like, hey, you can go to Santa Ana College. It's right across the street, and I think they have a good journalism program there. And so I just started taking classes at night classes, because I was working full-time during the day. So it was, again, kind of a fluke. I ended up at Santa Ana College, had no idea that it was the top journalism program in the U.S., which it was at the time and had been for about 15 years prior to me coming here. And so it was kind of a happy mistake. I just ended up in an evening class, kind of like in high school, like, oh yeah, I know how to write and I like to write. Let me do this to keep my gears going. Not thinking of it as a career, but just something to do that is something I enjoy.
That is wonderful. And again, life has a way of telling you where to go, and once you get to that destination, you either say, this is where I want to be, this is not where I want to be, and I'm glad that you ended up at the right place at the right time.
It's always kind of been the path of least resistance for me when I kept trying to like do kept trying to do the music side of things, and I'm of an age where I graduated into the Napster industry and the collapse of the music industry at that time. They've recouped some of it now that they go on tours and things like that and streaming, but yeah, I mean, I was part of it. I was downloading on Napster, so I was butchering the same industry that I even like wanted to go into. But even as I was trying to pursue that, like I actually, another night class I took at Santa Ana College was music business. That's what drew me to Santa Ana College also in the first place, was that they had a music business program at the time, and that was a different, maybe a Wednesday night class, and the journalism was a Tuesday night, so I was going to school a couple nights a week. And so I just kept wanting to pursue that, but like I was saying, sort of the path of least resistance, like the professor in journalism was really encouraging. Once he started to read my writing or hear my questions in class, he was like, oh, maybe you should do this. Maybe you should work part-time somewhere so you could come in during the day and be part of the newspaper. And so again, having that mentor, having someone to just encourage me or just kind of nudge in that direction. And he knew a lot about that industry. I wasn't making a lot of mentors and friends in the music scene at that time, and so it was really fortuitous that I found like the right people to push me in the direction to kind of, I mean, that's what a good educator does, is they see things in students that they don't see in themselves.
That is beautiful. I'm glad that Bud did that for you. It's Bud who we are talking about, of course.
Yes, Charles Little, aka Bud Little. Yeah, he was the chair of the department before me, and he was my mentor and my predecessor, and he is the one that encouraged me to come back to the program to teach, and we overlapped for about 5-6 years until his retirement in 2021.
That is quite a story. Now, about your education. So you end up at SAC. Mm-hmm. And from SAC, you end up being a part of El SAC News. There's a picture of you right at the entrance of where SAC News is located at SAC. Tell us a little bit about that picture and the education journey that followed.
Well, that photo is another fluke. I didn't even really know it existed, because often when we're leaving the Eldon newsroom as students, we're testing out our equipment. Like, oh, I have to go take this. I'm taking this camera to the soccer match or something. So let me test out the equipment. So we end up having all these kind of, like you probably do. You have B-roll footage of other students and stuff. And so we end up with all these photos of students in the newsroom, or they're running around on campus. We're trying to stop the action and train people how to photograph sports games. And so someone just took a photo of me. I think it was as I was leaving to walk out of the room for the evening. And so I'm standing there awkward, like, just grinning weirdly, clearly not wanting cameras on me. And yeah, I know.
Sorry.
Yep, here I am. But yeah, so I didn't even really know that existed. There's only probably 4 or 5 photos of me from my entire time at the Eldon, and most of them are, even like from those years, and most of them are photos that were taken by students in the testing process of like learning to use manual mode on a DSLR camera. And so I found it when I came back to teach. I went back through my little Eldon folder on my Life archive hard drive, and I found some of those images. And so I printed it out, because it's me, and I'm standing in the doorway of the newsroom that I now teach in. And so I put it up there for the students so they know that, you know, where I came from is where they are now. And I kind of joke that I was like, I've farted in the same seats. Like, I've been here. I know. I know what it's like in this room. I've sat in this room, and now I'm teaching in this room.
That is gorgeous. So it's a learning curve, and I believe it's a sign of inspiration to see that, because a professor can only tell a student so many times that I've been there where you're at. But to see a visual to see that photo, it changes the context, and it puts the words into actual action. And I believe, or at least for me, once I found out, number one, that was you, number two, that you were right there where I was once upon a time, it made me want to do something bigger with myself, and for that I thank you. Now, so you are a student at SAC. What was the rest of your education like?
You mean after SAC?
After SAC, yes, please.
So it took me, I'm on the average scale of transfer time. It takes about 6 years on average for our students to transfer, if they do, and I was on that path. So it took me a while, because like I said, I was taking night classes part-time, not really wanting to go full-time. It wasn't really until my last few semesters when I was like, okay, I got 90 plus units, I should probably transfer. And this is before the 60 unit rule. Sorry to anyone who's been cut off their financial aid at 60 units. But I had almost 100, and I was like, okay, I think it's time to transfer. Let me see where I can go. And that's when I really felt I was at that crossroads with, should I pursue music, or no, maybe it's time to take journalism more seriously. And I say that laughing, because I was already a journalist at that time, not just for the El Don, but I was a freelancer. I had been writing for the alt weeklies by that time, but by the time I transferred from SAC, I was already being published and being paid to write stories. I had weekly columns for now defunct alt weekly in Long Beach called the District Weekly, which was started by some OC Weekly people. So I've always had kind of affiliations with Orange County publications as well as Long Beach publications, where I ended up moving after Santa Ana as well. So when I transferred to USC. And which another fluke, like they were the only school that accepted me by a mistake in our counseling office.
Not our counselors.
I know, they're totally perfect all the time. I must be the only person that fell through the cracks, but someone did not notice that at the time our journalism classes were not transferable, and now they are. The curriculum's gone through it all. Everything's UC and CSU transferable, but at the time they weren't. So my 96 units were not all accepted, like at CSUs or UCs. So I got rejected from those schools because I only had 47 units, and you needed 48 units to transfer at the time. So I could have gone back and done like a yoga class or something, but I had completed all my GE requirements. I had all my undergraduate stuff. Like I said, I was already kind of a professional journalist, so I didn't really want to do that. And then USC, being a private institution, I applied there on a whim. It's expensive. I didn't know about scholarships. I didn't have financial help at the time. I didn't have parents to really guide me on any of that. And so I applied to USC on a whim, not even thinking that I would be able to afford it if I did get in. And in the end, they were the ones that called me and they said, we really want you to be here, but journalism is an impacted major. It's a 4-year major no matter what. So even if you transfer, for those that are thinking about it, USC is always a 4-year journalism major. But they said, pick any other major on campus that isn't impacted and you're in. So I picked communications. So I still stayed at Annenberg. And I was able to do that in 3 years. I just had to make up some of their undergraduate requirements. So I ended up staying 1 more year. I got a university grant, very thankful for it. I mean, I do have loans, but it's the same that I would have had at a CSU. So another happy accident and a fluke that like pushed me in the right direction, because USC opened up obviously so many opportunities, the networking opportunities, the whole Trojan Mafia thing, very real. Did not know what that world was like or anything. I mean, I grew up on food stamps and I'm in these classrooms with, students with MacBook Pros and they're, people from very different backgrounds than me, especially in the communications major. And so that was just a really great experience. I went right into the Daily Trojan. The day that I got onto campus for my orientation, I went to the Daily Trojan office and I said, what do you need? And they said, well, what section do you want to work on? I said, I can do it all. I came from the El Don, right? So I mean, at the time, they were telling us to be a triple threat. You have to be a writer, an editor, and a designer. You have to be able to do it all. And photography on top of that, and then. And this is 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when the like new media and multimedia was sort of a buzzword, and now of course we're all converged newsrooms, and you got to have 15 different technological skills if you're going to be reporting and publishing news. But at the time, for me to know InDesign, for me to know how to use a camera, for me to know how to copy edit and to write for all these different sections was really a rarity. So I was a floater at the Daily Trojan for 3 years. I became the lifestyle editor. I was a design director, and then I had a weekly column, a weekly cultural column. So that's a lot of the work that I did writing when I was in college. I still was a freelancer at the time. And then I went, after that, I went right into the master's program. I met Josh Kuhn, who's an amazing professor. He's a MacArthur Fellow now. And he really encouraged me to write more about music. So that was my first writing love, was lifestyle and music. So I wrote, instead of going into the music industry, I realized, I can help bands by promoting them or supporting them or telling their story. And so I became a music journalist. And so I was able to parlay that.
Okay, that is fantastic. That's fantastic. No. I love your story. Your educational background is so rich, and it tells people like myself that the battle never ends. Number one. Number two, that once we leave Santa Ana College, there's always so much more. And even if we don't go to a university, there's always something that's gonna be there to welcome us into a different environment, and we never stop learning. And listening to your time at a university makes me feel like life never ends, and it's an always a constant adventure that I want to go on.
Well, especially if you're a journalist. That's
Exactly.
That's why I became a journalist, because you never stop learning. As a journalist, you get to become you learn about things that you're curious about, and you get to ask like the dumbest questions, which is so fun because you have them in your head, but you don't want to seem dumb by being like, "Hey, what's that do?" But then you're like, "I'm a journalist. What's that do?" And then it makes it okay. It makes it acceptable. And so that's why I also love being a teacher, because I'm always learning. I'm always having to upgrade myself. I'm always researching. I'm always finding new things to bring into the classroom for students. So I'm always curious, and if you're not doing that, then why are you in this profession, even as a journalist or as a teacher?
Yes, and last question before we go to break. What was the biggest challenge that you encountered when you made your transition from student and a news writer at El Dawn to being the teacher at El Dawn?
Well, there's about a decade or so of my career in between there, so I had a lot of professional work in between. So by the time I came back to teach at El Dawn, I had already been an editor. I had started and run publications. I was a founding editor for multiple newspapers and magazines locally and outside. So I'd been a leader in journalism for a long time prior to that. So what I realized by then is that I was an editor, and I was doing this teaching work as an editor because the pipeline is really is very limited in our industry, right? How do people get out of school and go into our industry? There aren't internships. There's not a lot of paid internships. And so I was doing a lot of training, trying to find young writers in my editorial roles at major publications and trying to train them really to be ready for our big publications. And so realizing that, I'm already doing this work of teaching people, and it actually freed me of the confines of capitalism, let's say, I guess, because there's this churn that you have to do when you're working for a daily publication, and there isn't time for training. You need people to be ready to publish, and I didn't feel that was right because we don't have a lot of journalism programs that are ready to train students, except El Dawn and this program, but what I realized that I just transferred my editorial skills right back into the classroom, and it really freed me from having to do publishing every day and really let me focus on the nurturing and the mentoring of new and young journalists, because that's what we need in the industry right now.
That is really what we need in the industry.
Definitely.
When we come back, we'll talk about El Dawn's 100th anniversary and the art exhibit at the Centaur building. You're watching Saks in Focus. I'm Sandra Garrido.
Excuse me. Have you applied to the scholarship program?
Of course I did. It's free money.
Thank you. How about you? Have you applied for the scholarship program?
Yeah, I actually just made my friends apply.
That's good. Thank you. Excuse me. Have you applied for the scholarship program?
No, I haven't.
Why not?
I don't know how to.
Well, let's change that.
The Scholarship Foundation offers help to all SAC students, such as providing writing workshops to help students with the writing portion of the application.
I need a letter of recommendation.
Hey, don't let the letter of recommendation hold you back. A letter of recommendation can come from a professor or even a counselor. You shouldn't be afraid to ask for their help.
Wow, you did it.
Apply today.
Welcome back, Dons. I'm Sandra Garrido, and with me is Sarah Bennett, professor she's leading right now El Dawn, and we're celebrating 100 years of El Dawn. And what are we doing to celebrate?
So we have a big exhibition downtown Santa Ana at the Santora Street Space Gallery. We've had editors and alumni combing through the archives for, we've been doing it for about 6 months, but it's been something that we've been thinking about for at least 2 or 3 years when we figured out that the 100th anniversary was coming. So we've been slowly going through all of the archives, scanning them, finding physical archives that we can frame, analyzing the whole history, 100 years of not just the program history and El Dawn history, but also local history and the college's history, because as we know, journalism is the first rough draft of history. So by reading these old student newspapers, you can actually read the history of our city and our community and of our college.
What is, going through the archives, what was the one thing that you saw that shocked you the most?
Wow, I guess, how much history and global events and even local events and local demographic and cultural changes, how that was manifested in the publication. Like, a newspaper really does breathe through the city and through the people who are writing it. So in this case, student journalists, right? So you're really able to see the school and the city through their eyes. And so I would say the thing that surprised me the most was finding out, like in the 1940s during World War II, how World War II impacted our campus so much, and then how you can see that in the Eldon. I mean, first of all, it was smaller, so obviously paper shortages were a problem. If you go into the Neely Library, where all the archives are for both the Del Año, which is the yearbook, and the Eldon, which is the newspaper, and they were created by kind of a combined staff. There was overlap on that. But if you look at like the Del Años from the war years, they're not bound book copies. They're actually like cheap spiral binding with regular paper, as opposed to like glossier paper and like a thick binding like you would expect in a yearbook. But because they were limited on their supplies. And then for 1945 and 1946, we joked, we called it the El Girl staff because it was all females. There were no males on staff. The last male editor was drafted the sports editor was drafted in 1945, and they wrote a little blurb about it. It says, Frank Arata, drafted to service. They had a political columnist or a political cartoonist, an illustrator who was actually in a POW camp in Germany and was mailing cartoons to his parents for the Eldon. So they were publishing political cartoons that were like drawn in a POW camp that were being published in the Eldon. So there were still men participating somehow from overseas, but that was just the most fascinating thing, was watching the students adapt and still put out a publication and still write about it and covering what was going on and how our community was impacted. Every issue, there was a big page of like from the service members abroad, like what are they up to, what are they doing? They would publish letters. They created a pony edition, which they sent overseas to alumni. They had a list of about 1,300 alumni who were in the service, and they were consistent. And that's not just Eldon alumni, that's like SAC alumni. Right. Yeah, and so they were mailing pony editions, which were compendiums of like front pages. So that if they were bi-weekly, they would, every 2 months, they would combine like the top 3 covers onto one thing and mail it to everybody. So really fascinating stuff. Also, again, seeing it during Vietnam War and stuff too.
It is amazing to see how Santana College and the city of Santana has grown overall. While you were going through the archives, right now for us, it's a big deal that Russell Hall is being demolished. In the archives, is there anything about SAC's construction developments that got your attention that you said, oh, what?
I literally said that when I opened up one of the magazines called El Vivaz that we found. I did say that because there's photos of the welders, color photos. This is in the late 1960s. Think of like an old Life magazine looking thing, and that's what El Vivaz looked like. Color photos of the welders going ham on the joints in building Russell Hall. And the headline is like state of the art science building is being constructed or something. And so it's funny that at the time that was state of the art, and now we're tearing it down because we've built a new state of the art health and sciences building. So lots of construction stories. I mean, if you go to the exhibit and you kind of walk on the timeline, you can chart the growth of the campus from enrollment growth and ebbs and flows, because during World War II it was at its lowest. We only had 300 students. So then 1946, boom, enrollment high, all these veterans coming back. So you can see those kinds of shifts too, but then all the construction stories. I mean, looking at visions of the campus published in the Eldon 5 years before it was built, right? Like the story it says they bought this place on Bristol and 17th, this orange groves. There's a story about how they're raising the orange groves to build the campus. Those kinds of stories, even before the buildings were constructed, are even more fascinating to me. And then the parking expansion, how did we get that parking lot that goes all the way out to Washington? Yes. We were looking at old photos and noticing that there were still houses on that part that is now like where the Child Development Center is and stuff. There were houses there. It was called Martha Lane. It was a street. And then we found the story. We did some research. Like I said, I wonder when this happened. Well, how did we expand this campus? And then later on, finding the story that says, oh, we purchased the houses on Martha Lane to expand the parking lot southward. So finding all those, like how did we get to the campus as it is today? Because we only know from the time that we were here.
Absolutely.
And so it was really fascinating. And knowing that our tallest building on campus, the 4-story Dunlop Hall, is actually named after Sky Dunlop, who was an Eldon editor in 1930, and then he came back, and he was a newspaperman, very famous. He worked for Associated Press in the Pacific Northwest, but then came back and was like the assistant to the president in the 1950s and 60s. He was named Sky. His nickname was Sky because he was 6'8". He was the tallest guy around, and so it felt appropriate that they named the tallest building on campus after him.
That is fantastic. Now, last question before we leave. When going through the archives, I am sure you found at least one piece that you wrote to go into the exhibit. How did that make you feel to be part of 100 years of journalistic legacy?
There actually are no stories that I wrote in the exhibit because I designed everything in the exhibit, so I didn't put anything of myself in there. But I did put my friends that I still am friends with to troll them. No, their stories are great, but I did it so that I can shame them into coming to the alumni reception on Saturday. So there are some stories from other people that I know. I did see my stuff. I saw my layouts. That's what I was really the most proud of. I don't think any of my layouts made it into the exhibit, but I know the editors that were scanning, the alumni that were scanning through the archives, they liked some of my stories and they threatened to put them in, but then I ended up designing I had the final say, so I wanted other people to have their space in the exhibit. Because I know what I did, it's okay.
I am shocked. I really thought that you would have like a dedicated section to yourself. I don't know.
That's not how print journalists roll.
No,
It's not about us, it's always about the story.
I see that, and I agree with that. And actually, already went for a quick walk and a private tour. Thank you for that. And I got to see one of my fellow producers work in there right on the door. And for that, it was a really, really good moment. And for that, we thank you. Well, guys, we would like to thank you, Professor Bennett, for keeping us company. It's been amazing. We want to, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And you can watch previous episodes of our show right now on YouTube. Thank you.